Wars of Yugoslav Succession. Between 1991 and 1999, a series of armed, violent conflicts in Southeast Europe saw the dismantling of the country once called Yugoslavia. Beginning with clashes in Slovenia in 1991, followed by fighting in Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and in Kosovo and Serbia. The wars were simultaneously international and civil conflicts fought over each respective country's independence from the Yugoslav Federation. These conflicts also saw an unprecedented degree of destruction in the region and were characterized by widespread crimes and abuses, including ethnic cleansing and even genocide, where the first cases in Europe occurred since the Second World War. These crimes against humanity have led to their own international criminal court in The Hague and the conviction of numerous war criminals, which are still ongoing and often controversial. The violence during the wars in the former Yugoslavia and their lasting legacies of justice, trauma, and division have received major attention from both scholars and international media, and they've even featured prominently in several independent and Hollywood films. But what I want to know is, what impacts did these wars have on the region's environments? And in what way have they continued to affect the former Yugoslavia's local populations and landscapes here in the 21st century? My name is Joe Georgievsky, and I'm an environmental historian of Southeast Europe with family roots from the region. And for a long time, I've wanted to know more about how and why the conflicts in the 1990s have left deeper and lasting marks on its landscapes and the people who live off of them. So in this video, I want to explore the ways the environmental legacies of the wars have continued to impact societies in the former Yugoslavia today, as well as what it all means for the present and future of the region. I first became interested in this subject when I visited my old family property in the central Croatian region of Bilogora, where my grandmother was born, but which had been abandoned for decades. And with some heavy fighting in the area during the war in the 1990s, and fears that the family land might still be contaminated with landmines, I became aware of a link between war and violence, environmental transformation, and the transformation of rural and agricultural societies. But it didn't take me long to realize that these types of issues were common, to both greater and lesser degrees, throughout the entire former Yugoslavia, which in addition to the wars of the 1990s has experienced difficult transitions from communism and state socialism to privatization. So then, what were some of the major ways in which the Wars of Yugoslav Succession have affected the region's environments? Well, before I get into that, a short explanation of how I approach this topic is in order. Now, when I say environment or landscape, I'm operating under the idea that environments can be hybrid constructions, or in other words, combinations of both natural and social processes. All this is to say that instead of trying to separate nature from humans to look at so-called pristine wilderness or something like that, I also want to look at environments where humans and natural sites are intertwined and dependent on each other. From landscapes like vineyards to urban gardens and national parks, or infrastructure like dams and water supply networks. Historian Emanuel Kreike, who coined the term environcide to examine intentional environmental destruction in warfare, refers to one major outcome of this mutual dependence as environmental infrastructure, or the means and methods by which humans manipulate and shape their surrounding environments. And I think this is important since it really highlights how environmental changes caused by war also impact the humans living in and with the environment. It's this understanding of environment that I'm interested in, and the wars in the former Yugoslavia affected a variety of different environments, from rivers, lakes, and parks, to farms, soil, and the air we breathe. In order to get a better idea of the environmental impacts of war in the region, I decided to speak to someone who witnessed some of them firsthand, and so I interviewed a veteran, who kindly asked me for his identity not to be revealed. According to him, during the war and the siege of his hometown, he was aware of certain cases of environmental destruction like damaged infrastructure, industrial plants, the destruction of rural communities and farmland, and the almost ubiquitous presence of landmines. However, as a young father and soldier, he said there just wasn't time to think about long-term consequences of these problems and how they might have an impact on future generations after the war. During the war and the siege of the city he lived in, he really only had time to think about his family, himself, and the people next to him, which for someone like me who has never experienced combat, is not only eye-opening on an individual level, but also reveals perhaps one of the main reasons why so many environmental damages from war go unrecorded. When lives are threatened, potential environmental problems can become at best a secondary concern. Now, if any of you watching this video have directly been affected by environmental damages during war, or observed them yourselves, or even if you know someone who has, please feel free to contribute by following the link to the website listed below in the video description, where I encourage you to record your thoughts, reflections, and opinions in the message board. Now, when it comes to my own research based on archival records and other documents, unfortunately, there have been very few comprehensive studies on the environmental impacts of these wars, and it can be a huge challenge to try and find detailed records of them. For example, in Croatia, immediately after the war, a state commission for the inventory and assessment of war damages was formed. But they really only focused on expenses and the financial cost of damages, and they were unable, for various reasons, to provide broader statistics. For example, how many acres or hectares of farmland and forested land were destroyed. So the data in this video is incomplete and the topic requires much more research. But with some of the available sources, we can at least get a glimpse of the environmental cost of the wars in the former Yugoslavia. Now, I need to mention that the point of this video is to describe some of the environmental damages of conflict in the region more broadly, and is not really concerned with identifying specific perpetrators. Conversations about who did what and who should be prosecuted can be found in numerous places elsewhere. So here I kindly ask viewers to focus and reflect on how long-term environmental effects from wars really pay no attention to national borders or ethnic divisions and can affect everyone in the region. During the socialist period in Yugoslavia, Tito's vision was for a modern industrialized country, and the rapid development of industry became one of the most important goals of the socialist leadership. After Tito's death in 1980, economic crises led to new hardships for industrial facilities, companies, and their workers. And to make matters worse, during the wars in the 1990s, many of the already troubled factories, plants, and chemical complexes suffered heavy damage, which not only had tremendous economic impacts in all of the countries involved, but also led to serious cases of pollution and concerns over their potential impacts on human health. In Croatia, one of the most unsettling cases of pollution caused by the targeting of industrial infrastructure was that of the damages to the INA Naftaplin oil refinery in the town of Sisak. The refinery sits near the banks of the Kupa River and the Sava River, which itself creates a natural border between Croatia and Bosnia, before reaching its confluence with the Danube in Belgrade. And between the autumn of 1991 and the summer of 1992, it was targeted by artillery barrages at least 27 times. Damages to the refinery, including fires and destruction of its pipelines and storage tanks, led to the discharging of an estimated 90,000 cubic meters of crude oil and various other chemicals. Another estimate declared that one of the fires set by bombardment of the refinery in 1992 led to an oil slick of up to 700 kilometers, or around 430 miles, in the Sava River. Despite the incredible environmental damage caused by the targeting of the oil refinery, which local Croatian media painted at the time as a great ecological catastrophe, it received little international media attention. But several other chemical industrial facilities were also damaged, and some were even completely destroyed. Also in Croatia, part of the Osijek-based Saponia cosmetics factory located in the settlement of Nemetin was completely destroyed after being shelled in late August of 1991. After being bombed and subsequently burning out, the destruction led to contamination by raw materials and various chemical substances, including detergents, pesticides, and other hazardous wastes. According to one estimate, the blasts created a fire at the facility which led to at least 1,500 tons of chemical waste being discharged into the surrounding area, including the nearby banks of the Drava River. Once again, these are only two of many recorded cases of destruction to chemical plants and factories. According to Mervyn Richardson, who was tasked by the UN Industrial Development Organization with assessing and recording environmental damages during the war, around 30% of all Croatia's industry had either been damaged or destroyed by 1993. In neighboring Bosnia-Herzegovina, the 1992-1995 war had a tremendous impact on the country's industry. In the city of Mostar alone, 90% of its industrial capacity was affected, and heavy damages to its infrastructure, like the Mostar water and sanitation utility, led to major pollution of the Neretva River, an important freshwater and energy source. And an oil refinery in the city of Brod, right on the Bosnian-Croatian border and the Sava River, was also heavily damaged during the war, though specific details on the environmental costs of these damages have been elusive. In addition, in most of the country's industrial facilities, normal operations were impossible due to the deaths and displacements of their workers, and a lack of resources. The sudden ceasing of operations in many facilities itself led to potential hazardous pollution, even if the facilities were not directly damaged. And in addition to all this, pollution from PCBs, discarded munitions, wastewater, garbage, and even depleted uranium remain major environmental and health concerns in the region today. Aside from the more dramatic and direct threats of industrial pollution, the wars have also demonstrated an ability to transform environments in other long-term ways. While countless buildings in the former Yugoslavia still visibly bear the scars of war, landscapes often do as well. In Croatia's Bila Gora region, in 1991, a munitions warehouse was deliberately mined and blown up by a JNA officer, which led to an explosion so large that it not only killed 11 Croatian soldiers, but it left a crater up to 12 meters deep and destroyed much of the surrounding Bedenik forest. And today, a restored memorial park showcases remnants of the permanent environmental imprint caused by the explosion. In addition to burned out forests, craters, bunkers, and cemeteries, lines of trenches from the wars still mark parts of the region's landscapes, especially in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And in Sarajevo, a tunnel constructed by the Bosnian army to provide protection from shelling and snipers is still preserved in the earth today. Former trenches used during the siege and battle for Sarajevo still mark the landscape in the hills around the city, including in a newly opened Friendship Park. Bombs also left hundreds of craters in Serbia's Fruška Gora National Park, and the bombing of facilities in the park even led to the creation of a new lake in Ledinci. The wars overwhelmingly affected rural landscapes and communities throughout the region, many of which remain abandoned today. According to one pair of experts, war damages affected an estimated 10,000 hectares or almost 25,000 acres of land in Bosnia. In addition to the burning of villages, war crimes and human rights abuses often occurred in rural settings, and of the hundreds of thousands of people killed or millions of people displaced during the wars, rural inhabitants often bore the brunt, and many of those who were forced to leave never returned, leaving behind newly transformed landscapes of abandoned and overgrown land, houses, and other buildings. At first glance, villages, rural dwellings, and even urban areas being overtaken by overgrowth might appear to be a natural process representing nature sort of triumphantly taking back the landscape. However, it's important to acknowledge that abandonment can also contribute towards harmful environmental transformations in some major ways. Firstly, the abandonment of homes, farmland, buildings, and various facilities can leave environments exposed to pollution, harmful chemicals like asbestos and other hazardous wastes, to the structures themselves acting as pollutants and contributing to the overgrowth of harmful vegetation, including poisonous and toxic weeds, and in some extreme cases, loss of biodiversity through pests or invasive species. Abandonment can also contribute towards wildfires, especially in the drier Mediterranean parts of the region, as well as erosion, landslides, and flooding, though these problems are highly variable and are often difficult to find records for. Another lasting environmental consequence of the wars that contributes towards abandonment and neglect, environmental transformations, hazards, and safety risks is that of lingering landmines and unexploded ordnance, or UXOs. Even in the 2020s, almost 3 decades since the end of the wars, Croatia remains the most heavily mined country in the European Union. While Bosnia continues to be in the top 10 most heavily mined countries, in the world. Between 1991 and 2020, landmines have killed an estimated total of 523 people in Croatia, and in Bosnia, landmines and UXOs have killed more than 600 people, and thousands of victims have been injured in both countries since the end of the wars, including a large amount of children. And the casualties only continue to mount. As recently as 2021, in Saborsko, part of the central Croatian Lika region near the Bosnian border, a migrant was killed after stepping on a landmine, while others near him were severely injured, showing that landmines placed during the wars in the 1990s continue to claim victims despite efforts to demine them. While landmines can reveal ways in which combatants have used environments and landscapes as weapons of war, they also have long-term environmental impacts that stretch far beyond the end of armed hostilities. These include exacerbating disasters like forest fires and floods. In 2014, Cyclone Tamara caused the heaviest rainfall in the region in 120 years and led to extreme flooding and landslides throughout Southeast Europe, causing fears that unexploded landmines had been transported to previously unmarked and uncontaminated areas, some in Bosnia having traveled as far as 23 kilometers, or just over 14 miles. In 2023, wildfires near the coastal tourist town of Dubrovnik, which was shelled and on the front lines of the war in 1991, reportedly set off at least 23 landmines in areas that were believed to have been cleared. Now, this has just been a glimpse of some of the environmental consequences of war in the former Yugoslavia, which has been faced with the dual challenge of remediating war damages and the difficult transition to privatization. While I've tried to avoid focusing on identifying perpetrators, I hope that it's been made clear how war can affect the environments of all societies, regardless of ethnic lines and national borders, something which has been the case throughout modern history in conflicts across the entire world. While it's difficult and probably impossible to find records for all of the environmental damages that occurred during the Wars of Yugoslav Succession, it is clear that the war's effects on landscapes and environments still affects the people living in the region today, and they therefore deserve far more attention, including attention from scholars, international media, and local politicians. In the next video, I want to explore how public memory and commemorative cultures in the region, especially where tourism is coming to dominate many communities, might be able to incorporate some of the environmental consequences of war in the former Yugoslavia. With the next video, I also want to explore new ways in which cultures of remembrance surrounding the different ways war has led to environmental issues can also contribute towards cultures of shared future. But in order to do so, I firmly believe that the most effective way forward is by collaboration and inclusion of anyone who is interested. So whether you're a scholar, a student, someone who's experienced or is experiencing war's environmental effects firsthand, or if you know someone who did, or anyone from the global community who wants to address the ways armed conflicts affect our surroundings, I encourage you to share your own thoughts and reflections. Once again, please find the link to the project's website below, where you can share your thoughts on the message board, which is available to the public. Hopefully, with your contribution, we can create an evolving and lasting platform for reflection and the creation of a commemorative culture that surrounds the ways wars have affected and continue to affect the environments of Southeast Europe.